Hello there, fellow truth seekers and insomniacs. Before we dive into tonight's chilling tale, I hope you're having a wonderful day, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. Whether you're listening from New York at midnight, London during your morning commute, or Tokyo on your lunch break, welcome to Sleep Theories. What time is it where you are right now? Are you bundled up somewhere cold? Or maybe you're somewhere warm where the weather feels just a little too perfect, a little too controlled. Speaking of weather, that's exactly what tonight's story is about. But before we begin, if you enjoy these deep dives into the mysteries that keep us awake at night, please hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring you more stories that question everything you think you know about the world around us. Now settle in, because tonight we're going to explore a conspiracy that's literally floating above our heads every single day. This is the story of Dr. Malcolm Greaves, and the terrible burden of being the man who learned to make it rain. March 15th, 2007. They came to me on a Tuesday. Funny how I remember that detail. Tuesdays were always my favourite day of the week. Quiet. Productive. The kind of day where atmospheric data flows clean and predictable across my computer screens at the National Weather Service. I was analysing pressure differentials over the Bering Sea when Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne walked into my cubicle. I knew her by reputation only. DARPA's Golden Girl, Atmospheric Sciences Division. She wore a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and she smiled like someone who'd practised in front of a mirror. "Dr. Greaves," she said, "we need to talk." An hour later, I was sitting in a windowless conference room with Hawthorne and two men in identical navy suits who never gave their names. They called it Project Stratos. They said it was the future of climate defence. They said we could save the world. "Imagine," Hawthorne said, sliding a manila folder across the polished table, "preventing Hurricane Katrina before it ever formed. Imagine bringing rain to drought-stricken regions, dissipating tornadoes, redirecting blizzards away from populated areas." The folder contained technical specifications that made my physicist's heart race. High-frequency radio wave arrays, ionospheric manipulation, weather modification on a scale I'd only dreamed about in graduate school. They were talking about using HAARP, the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program in Gacona, Alaska, but not for the atmospheric research the public knew about. "This is theoretical," I said, but my hands were already shaking as I flipped through the pages. "Not anymore," said one of the navy suits. "The preliminary tests have been promising. They offered me a salary that would put my daughter Emma through any college she wanted. They offered me a chance to work on technology that could reshape civilization. They offered me the opportunity to be remembered as the man who tamed the sky. I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why they needed someone with my specific expertise in atmospheric pressure manipulation. I should have asked why the meeting was off campus, why the NDAs were thicker than the technical specifications, why they needed an answer by Friday. Instead, I thought about Emma's college fund. I thought about drought-ravaged Ethiopia and flood-devastated Bangladesh. I thought about standing before the Nobel Prize Committee, accepting an award for saving humanity from climate chaos. "When do I start?" I asked. Hawthorne's smile was perfect, too perfect. "Welcome to the future, Dr. Greaves." April 3rd, 2007. Alaska in April is a lesson in desolation. The HAARP facility sits in the middle of 33 acres of scrubland, 180 radio antennas stretching toward an indifferent sky, like mechanical prayer flags. Each antenna is 72 feet tall, connected to a transmitter capable of generating 3.6 megawatts of radio frequency power. When they all fire together, they can pump 3.6 billion watts into the ionosphere. The official story, the one taxpayers get to hear, is that HAARP studies the ionosphere to improve radio communications and surveillance systems. The reality is more complex. We heat specific sections of the ionosphere, creating thermal instabilities that cascade down through atmospheric layers like stones thrown into a pond. My first month was spent learning the hardware, banks of computers monitoring atmospheric conditions across 17 time zones, satellite uplinks providing real-time weather data from every corner of the globe, quantum processors running atmospheric models so complex they could predict the path of a butterfly's wing flap through 1,000 iterations of cause and effect. Dr. Sarah Chen, my project supervisor, gave me the grand tour on my first day. She was younger than me, maybe 35, with the kind of intense focus that comes from solving problems most people couldn't even comprehend. The ionosphere is Earth's electrical nervous system, she explained as we walked between the antenna arrays. Heat the right section at the right frequency, and you can trigger reactions thousands of miles away. It's like acupuncture for the atmosphere. And this actually works, I asked. See that storm front moving through the Gulf of Alaska? I looked where she pointed. Clear skies stretched to the horizon. Give me 6 hours, she said. 6 hours later, rain was falling on Anchorage for the first time in 3 weeks. Jesus, I whispered. Jesus had nothing to do with it, Chen said. That was 17 minutes of targeted ionospheric heating at 3.95 megahertz. Cost the taxpayers about $40,000 in electricity. That night, alone in my assigned quarters, a prefab building that looked like it belonged on a military base, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what I'd witnessed. We'd made it rain. Not cloud seeding, not silver iodide particles, but actual atmospheric manipulation through radio waves. We'd reached into the sky and turned a knob. I called Emma that night. She was 19, studying environmental science at UC Berkeley, full of passion for saving the planet from climate change. "How's the new job, Dad?" she asked. "Complicated," I said. "Good complicated or bad complicated?" I watched through my window as the antenna array powered down for the night. Red warning lights blinking in sequence like a mechanical heartbeat. I'm not sure yet. June 12th, 2007. They called it Operation Green Garden. The target was the Darfur region of Sudan, where 3 consecutive years of drought had left 2 million people dependent on international food aid. The mission briefing made it sound humanitarian. Bring rain to the desert, save lives, demonstrate American technological leadership in climate assistance. I worked for 18 days preparing the atmospheric models. Sudan's weather patterns are notoriously unpredictable, influenced by everything from Mediterranean pressure systems to monsoon moisture from the Indian Ocean. Creating artificial precipitation required threading a needle through chaos theory itself. The operation launched at 0400 Greenwich Mean Time on June 15th. I sat in HARP's control centre, surrounded by screens showing atmospheric data from 3 continents. Chen stood behind me, calling out frequency adjustments while technicians monitored power levels across 180 transmitter stations. "Initiating ionospheric heating, mark," I said into my headset. 3.6 billion watts of radio energy punched upward into the sky, targeting a specific section of ionosphere 150 miles above the Earth's surface. The heated plasma created a thermal lens that bent and focused radio waves from commercial broadcasting stations across North Africa, creating what we called an atmospheric pressure gradient. For 6 hours we held that gradient steady. Satellite imagery showed moisture being drawn northward from the Red Sea, condensing into cloud formations that shouldn't have existed in that region during that season. At 13:47 GMT, it started raining in Darfur. The control room erupted in cheers. Chen actually hugged me. We'd done it, reached across 6,000 miles and turned drought into deliverance. The rain continued for 3 days, enough to save the summer harvest for 400,000 people. That night, Hawthorne called from Washington. "Outstanding work, Dr. Greaves. The President has been briefed. State Department is calling it a game changer for American soft power projection." "Soft power projection?" I asked. "To hearts and minds, Malcolm. When America controls the weather, America controls the conversation." Something cold settled in my stomach. I thought this was about humanitarian aid. It is, but humanitarian aid is politics by other means. After she hung up, I sat in my quarters staring at news footage from Sudan. Farmers dancing in the rain, children filling buckets with clean water for the first time in months, UN officials calling it a miraculous atmospheric anomaly. They were right about the anomaly part, but nothing about it was miraculous. September 8th, 2007. The second operation wasn't in Sudan. Bangladesh, Chen announced during our morning briefing. Elections next month. The opposition party has been gaining ground in rural districts where flooding destroyed rice crops last season. I looked at the mission parameters on my screen. Instead of bringing rain, we were being asked to enhance an existing monsoon system. Make it stronger, make it last longer, make it flood specific districts where anti-American sentiment was running high among farmers. This isn't humanitarian, I said. Of course it is, said Hawthorne, who'd flown in from DC for the operation. We're helping stabilise a key ally in South Asia. Bangladesh needs a government that can work with international partners on climate issues, by drowning their opposition voters, by creating conditions that allow rational leadership to emerge. The mission went ahead over my objections. We powered up the array on September 15th, targeting ionospheric sections above the Bay of Bengal. The enhanced monsoon flooded 17 districts. 300,000 people were displaced. The elections were postponed for 6 months. When they were finally held, the pro-American candidate won by a landslide. That night, I walked outside and stared up at the antenna array. Each towering mast was lit by red aviation warning lights, creating a forest of electronic prayer flags against the aurora-painted sky. The northern lights themselves were partly artificial, a side effect of our ionospheric heating experiments. Even the aurora was fake now. I thought about the farmers in Bangladesh, huddled in refugee camps, wondering why the gods had sent such terrible floods. They'd never know that the disaster came from a radio array in Alaska, operated by a physicist who'd convinced himself he was saving the world. They didn't want to stop storms, they wanted to place them, and I was learning to aim. February 14th, 2008, Valentine's Day. Emma was supposed to visit for spring break, but I told her the facility was under construction. I couldn't bear the thought of her seeing what we'd built here, what I'd helped build. The Venezuela operation was different. Instead of flooding, they wanted drought. 3 months without rain in the Orinoco River Basin, timed to coincide with agricultural planting season. The goal was to create food shortages that would destabilise President Chavez's government. Hugo's been making noise about nationalising American oil assets, Hawthorne explained during the mission briefing. A little climate pressure might remind him of the benefits of international cooperation. I'd been with the programme for almost a year. I understood now that Project Stratos had nothing to do with climate defence and everything to do with climate offence. Weather was the perfect weapon, untraceable, deniable, devastating. When a hurricane destroys a city, who's going to suspect it was made in Alaska? The Venezuela drought lasted 4 months. Crop failures led to food riots in Caracas. Chavez was forced to import grain from American suppliers at above-market prices. The oil nationalisation plans were quietly shelved. I started drinking that spring. Not much at first, just a beer with dinner, maybe 2 on weekends. But as the missions continued, the alcohol became necessary. It was the only way to sleep without dreaming about weather maps and suffering populations. Chen noticed my drinking during a late-night calibration session. "You okay, Malcolm?" she asked. "As define okay?" "You're having doubts." It wasn't a question. Chen was too smart for questions. "We're destroying people's lives," I said. "We're preventing wars. Do you know what would happen if countries started fighting over water resources? Over arable land? Climate change is going to create 100 million refugees in the next 50 years. We're managing that crisis before it becomes unmanageable. By choosing who gets to starve. By maintaining stability. By ensuring that global decisions get made by rational actors instead of desperate ones." I looked at her across the control room. She genuinely believed it. That's what scared me most. Not that we were the villains in this story, but that we thought we were the heroes. "What about consent?" I asked. "What about sovereignty? We're affecting the weather in countries that never agreed to this." "Hurricanes don't ask for consent either," Chen said. "Neither do droughts or floods or heat waves. Climate is a global system, Malcolm. It can't be managed by national governments acting independently. So we decide, just us. Someone has to." That night I tried to call Emma. She didn't answer. When I finally reached her the next day, she told me she'd been at a climate protest in San Francisco, demanding government action on carbon emissions. "The weather's getting crazy, Dad," she said. "Last month we had a heat wave in January. This month it's been raining for 3 weeks straight. It's like the climate is broken." I wanted to tell her the truth. that the climate wasn't broken, it was being operated, that the unusual weather patterns she was protesting weren't symptoms of climate change, but tools of climate control, that her father was one of the people turning the knobs. Instead, I said, "Stay safe, sweetheart. Always do, Dad. Love you. Love you too." After I hung up, I sat in my quarters and finished a bottle of whiskey. Outside, the aurora danced green and gold across the Alaskan sky. Beautiful and artificial, and utterly convincing. Just like everything else we did here. July 22nd, 2008. The protest started in Tehran on July 1st. Students demanding democratic reforms, opposition leaders calling for free elections, civil rights activists marching in the streets. The Iranian government responded with water cannons and riot police, but the demonstrations continued to grow. Then they called us. "Heat dome," Hawthorne said during the emergency briefing. "Target Tehran and surrounding districts. Duration, 3 weeks minimum. Goal, make outdoor assembly physically impossible." I stared at the mission parameters. They wanted us to create an artificial high-pressure system over Iran that would trap hot air like a lid on a pot. Temperatures would reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity would become unbearable. Anyone trying to march in the streets would risk heat stroke within minutes. "This is going to kill people," I said. "Heat waves kill people every summer," Hawthorne replied. "This one just happens to serve American strategic interests." The operation launched on July 15th. We used a new technique Chen had developed, creating multiple ionospheric heating zones that formed a high-pressure dome spanning 400 square miles. It was our most sophisticated weather manipulation to date, requiring round-the-clock monitoring and constant frequency adjustments. The heat wave lasted 26 days. Temperatures in Tehran reached 124 degrees. The protests ended after the first week. Hospitals overflowed with heat stroke victims. The government distributed free air conditioners to loyal neighbourhoods while leaving opposition districts to swelter. International media blamed climate change. Climate scientists pointed to shifting polar jet streams and unprecedented atmospheric conditions. Nobody suspected that the heat dome was artificial, maintained by radio waves from Alaska. But I knew, and I knew that every person who died in that heat wave died because I'd helped create it. On the day the operation ended, I submitted my resignation letter to Chen. She handed it back to me without reading it. "Resignations require approval from Washington," she said. "Yours was denied." "What do you mean, denied? I'm not military personnel." "Check your contract, Malcolm. Section 47, subsection C. Personnel with level 5 security clearances cannot terminate employment without approval from the Department of Defense." I went back to my quarters and read my contract. She was right. I'd signed away my right to quit. The fine print I'd ignored in my excitement about saving the world had made me a prisoner of my own expertise. That night I called Emma. She was in Iran, part of a Berkeley study abroad program. "Dad, it's horrible here," she said. "The heat is like nothing I've ever experienced. People are dying in the streets. The government won't even turn on public water fountains in neighbourhoods where people protested." My throat felt like it was closing. "When are you coming home?" "Next week. I can't wait to get out of here. It's like the Earth itself is angry." The Earth wasn't angry. It was being operated by her father. After the call, I walked outside and stared up at the antenna array, each mast reaching toward the stars like an accusation. I thought about the protesters in Tehran, huddled in air-conditioned buildings, their movement broken by heat I'd helped create. Weather is the new war, and I was their missile. October 15th, 2008. I tried to run in October, just packed a bag and drove toward Anchorage, planning to catch the first flight to Seattle. I made it 30 miles before the black SUV pulled me over. 2 men in suits, different faces from the ones who'd recruited me, but the same dead eyes. "Dr. Greaves," said the one who looked like an accountant, "there seems to be some confusion about your travel authorization." "I'm taking vacation time." "Vacation requests require advance approval. You didn't submit the proper forms." "I didn't know I needed forms to leave Alaska." "You do now." They drove me back to the facility. Chen was waiting in the control room, her face carefully neutral. "Malcolm, we need to talk." "About what? About how I'm apparently a prisoner?" "About your daughter." My blood went cold. What about Emma? She's become quite the activist. Climate protests, anti-government demonstrations, very passionate about environmental issues. Chen showed me a file folder. Photos of Emma at protests in San Francisco, Berkeley, Sacramento. Transcripts of her social media posts calling for government action on climate change. Records of her involvement with environmental groups that the FBI had classified as persons of interest. We know you care about her, Chen said. We know you want her to be safe. Are you threatening my daughter? We're reminding you that activism can be dangerous. Protesters sometimes have accidents. Sometimes they disappear during police raids. Sometimes they get involved with the wrong people and end up on terrorist watch lists. I understood. Emma's safety depended on my cooperation. They didn't need to lock me in a cell. They'd made Emma the cell. What do you want me to do? Your job. Continue your excellent work on Project Stratos. Help us maintain global stability. That night I called Emma and told her to be careful at protests, to stay away from radical groups, to keep a low profile. Dad, you sound scared, she said. I just worry about you. I have to do something, Dad. The climate is falling apart. If people like me don't speak up, who will? People like you don't need to speak up, I wanted to say. People like me are already controlling the climate, but not the way you think, not the way you hope. Instead, I said, just be careful, sweetheart. After the call, I sat in my quarters and tried to figure out how I'd become this person. A year ago, I'd been a government meteorologist with a comfortable life and a clear conscience. Now I was a weapons operator who couldn't quit, couldn't run, couldn't even protect his own daughter from the consequences of his work. The worst part was that they were right about one thing. Someone did have to make these decisions. Climate change was real, was accelerating, was going to displace hundreds of millions of people in the coming decades. The question wasn't whether weather would be weaponized, it was who would control the weapons. They'd convinced me that it was better for America to control the weather than to let chaos decide. They'd convinced me that managed catastrophe was better than random disaster. They'd convinced me to become the kind of person who could sleep at night while children died in heat waves I'd helped create. They didn't need soldiers anymore. They had storms, and they had me. August 3rd, 2009. Hurricane Maria formed off the coast of West Africa on July 28th, 2009. Under normal conditions, it would have tracked northwest through the Atlantic, possibly making landfall somewhere between the Carolinas and New England. But these weren't normal conditions. New mission parameters, Hawthorne announced during our morning briefing. Maria needs to hit the Gulf Coast, specifically Louisiana ports between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. I studied the storm's projected path on the main display screen. Why Louisiana? The storm's natural track takes it away from population centres. Longshore workers have been on strike for 6 weeks, Hawthorne explained. Container ships are backing up in the Gulf. Supply chains are disrupted. A hurricane would end the strike and provide cover for bringing in non-union replacement workers. We want to destroy an entire city to break a labour strike. We want to provide economic stabilisation during a critical period. The strike is costing American businesses $12 million per day. A hurricane would cost less than that in total recovery funds. The mathematics of evil. They'd reduced human suffering to a cost-benefit analysis. Hurricane redirection was the most complex operation we'd ever attempted. Natural hurricanes are massive atmospheric engines, powered by warm ocean water and guided by high-altitude wind patterns. Changing a hurricane's path required manipulating weather systems across thousands of square miles. We started on August 1st, creating high-pressure zones north of the storm to block its natural track, while heating ocean water in the Gulf to strengthen the system and draw it westward. The operation required coordinating with HAARP facilities in Puerto Rico and Greenland, creating a network of ionospheric manipulation points that could guide the hurricane like bumpers in a pinball machine. For 5 days we steered Maria through the Gulf of Mexico. I watched satellite imagery showing the storm growing stronger as it approached Louisiana, fed by the artificially heated water we'd created. Wind speeds reached 140 miles per hour. The storm surge was predicted to reach 15 feet. On August 6th, Hurricane Maria made landfall near Houma, Louisiana. The eye wall passed directly over major shipping ports. Storm surge flooded container yards and damaged harbour facilities. Winds destroyed dock equipment and grounded the entire commercial fleet. The longshore strike ended the next day. Workers agreed to return to their jobs to help with hurricane recovery. The shipping companies got everything they'd demanded in the original negotiations, plus federal disaster funds to rebuild their facilities with newer, more efficient equipment. 17 people died in Hurricane Maria. The news called it a freak storm that defied all meteorological predictions. Climate scientists published papers about unprecedented atmospheric conditions in the Atlantic. Insurance companies paid out $2.3 billion in claims. Nobody connected the hurricane to the labour strike. Nobody suspected that the storm had been steered like a weapon. That night I got drunk and called Emma. She was in her senior year at Berkeley, writing her thesis on climate change adaptation strategies. "Did you see the news about Louisiana?" she asked. "Yeah, terrible storm." "The weird thing is, none of the climate models predicted it would turn west like that. It's like the hurricane changed its mind mid-track." "Hurricanes don't change their minds," I wanted to tell her. "They get changed by people like your father." "Weather's complicated," I said. "Not this complicated. Dad, I think something's happening to the climate that we don't understand yet. Storms are behaving differently. Heat waves are appearing in impossible places. It's like someone's playing with the weather." She was too smart. She was figuring it out through pure scientific intuition, putting together patterns that weren't supposed to be visible to anyone outside the program. "That sounds paranoid, sweetheart." "Maybe, but paranoid doesn't mean wrong." After we hung up, I sat in my quarters with a bottle of whiskey and thought about Maria's victims. A grandfather who drowned in his basement. A mother and child killed by a falling tree. A harbour worker crushed by shipping containers. They died for a labour contract. They died because we needed to move cargo more efficiently through Louisiana ports. They died because I'd helped steer a hurricane into their homes. I finished the bottle and passed out in my chair. When I woke up, Chen was standing in my doorway. "You missed the morning briefing," she said. "What's the next target?" "Venezuela again. They're trying to renegotiate oil contracts." "More drought?" "Flooding this time. Hit their petroleum infrastructure during rainy season." I looked at her standing there in her pristine lab coat, clipboard in hand, discussing mass destruction like it was a routine equipment calibration. "How do you sleep at night?" I asked. "On Egyptian cotton sheets." "Very comfortable." She wasn't joking, she wasn't being sarcastic, she genuinely didn't understand the question. That's when I realised the real horror of Project Stratos wasn't the weather weapons themselves. It was how normal they'd become, how easily brilliant people could adapt to orchestrating catastrophes, how quickly mass murder could feel like routine administrative work. Chen walked away, leaving me alone with my hangover and the knowledge that tomorrow we'd start planning another hurricane, another drought, another heat wave, another perfectly normal day at the office. March 17th, 2010. Emma graduated from Berkeley in December with highest honours. Her thesis, Anomalous Weather Patterns in the Anthropocene Era, won the Departmental Award for Outstanding Undergraduate Research. She'd spent 8 months analysing statistical aberrations in global weather data, looking for patterns that might indicate systematic climate manipulation. She found them. Not the full picture. She didn't have access to classified information about HAARP operations. But she'd identified correlation patterns between geopolitical events and unusual weather phenomena. Her thesis documented 17 cases where statistically improbable weather events had coincided with diplomatic crises, trade disputes, or civil unrest. "Look at this," she said during a video call, holding up charts and graphs. Hurricane Maria in 2009 completely defied all tracking models. The Iran heatwave in 2008 occurred during the largest protests in Tehran's history. The Bangladesh floods in 2007 happened right before their elections. My hands were shaking as I watched her present evidence of everything I'd been doing for 3 years. Correlation isn't causation, sweetheart. I know that, Dad. But the statistical probability of these coincidences is less than 0.003%. That's not random. That's intentional. She'd gotten a job with the National Climate Assessment, a federal program that monitored long-term climate trends. Her first assignment was analysing weather modification research, including historical data from HAARP. They're letting me look at the real files, Dad, not just the public relations stuff. Some of the atmospheric research going on in Alaska is incredible. They're actually heating the ionosphere to study radio wave propagation. Sounds boring. Are you kidding? They're playing with the fundamental electrical systems of the planet. The theoretical applications are amazing. You could create artificial aurora, disrupt satellite communications, maybe even influence weather patterns if you knew what you were doing. She was getting too close, and I knew what happened to people who got too close to classified programs. Emma, maybe you should focus on other research topics. Why? This is the most important work I've ever done. If someone's really manipulating weather systems, the public needs to know. Climate change is bad enough without adding intentional weather warfare to the mix. 3 days later, Emma disappeared. She was supposed to meet friends for dinner in Alexandria, Virginia. Security cameras showed her leaving her apartment building at 7:15 p.m. Her car was found the next morning in a parking garage near the Potomac River. Her purse was still inside, along with her phone and wallet. There were no signs of struggle. The police investigation lasted 6 weeks. They interviewed her friends, her co-workers, her professors. They checked financial records, phone logs, social media accounts. They found no evidence of foul play, no indication that she'd planned to disappear voluntarily. Sometimes people just vanish, the detective told me, especially young women under stress. She might have had personal problems she didn't share with anyone. Emma didn't have personal problems. She had a government research job, a small apartment she loved, friends who cared about her, and a father who couldn't tell her the truth about why she needed to stop investigating weather modification programs. I knew who'd taken her. I knew why. And I knew that calling the police or the FBI or Congress wouldn't bring her back. It would just confirm that I was no longer useful to Project Stratos. That night, Chen found me in the control room, staring at weather satellite displays. "I heard about Emma," she said. "I'm sorry." "Where is she?" "I don't know." "Don't lie to me, Sarah." "I'm not lying. Personnel decisions at that level are above my clearance. But Malcolm, she was getting very close to information that could compromise national security. She's my daughter, and she was investigating classified weapons programs. What did you think would happen?" I turned to look at her. Dr. Sarah Chen, atmospheric physicist, brilliant scientist, architect of hurricane redirection protocols, the woman who taught me to make it rain. "I want her back." "Then do your job. Stop drinking, stop questioning orders, prove that you're still committed to the program. And if I do that, Emma comes home." Emma's situation is complex, but cooperation would certainly improve her circumstances. That was the moment I understood my real position in Project Stratos. I wasn't just a weapons operator, I was a hostage. They'd taken Emma to ensure my compliance, but they'd also taken me to ensure hers. If she was still alive, she was probably in a facility somewhere, being told that her father's cooperation was the only thing keeping her safe. We were each other's chains. I went back to work the next day. I recalibrated ionospheric heating arrays. I calculated atmospheric pressure differentials. I helped steer storms into places where they could serve American strategic interests. I became the perfect employee, productive, compliant, and utterly broken. 6 months later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photograph of Emma sitting in what looked like a comfortable room, reading a book. She appeared healthy and unharmed. There was no message, but the meaning was clear. She was alive, she was safe, and she would remain that way as long as I continued to cooperate. I kept the photograph on my desk in the control room. Sometimes, during long operations, I would look at it and remember what I was really working for. Not American national security, not global climate stability, not the prevention of resource wars. I was working to keep Emma alive, and they were working to keep me operational. It was the perfect weapon system, a father and daughter, each held hostage by the other's safety, each powering a machine designed to destroy the world in order to save it. January 8th, 2011. They called the operation Tempestgate. The briefing came directly from Washington, not from Hawthorne or Chen, but from people whose names I was never allowed to know. men's suits who spoke in euphemisms and referred to countries by code numbers instead of names. The target was Europe, all of it. "We need a polar vortex," said the man who looked like a banker. "Duration, minimum 2 weeks. Coverage, everything west of the Urals south to the Mediterranean." I stared at the mission parameters on the classified display screen. They wanted us to create an artificial Arctic weather system that would cover 30% of the world's industrialized nations. Temperatures would drop to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit across most of the continent. Natural gas supplies would be overwhelmed, electrical grids would fail, transportation systems would shut down. "This will kill thousands of people," I said. "Winter kills people every year," replied the banker. "This winter will just be more efficient." The operation was scheduled for January 15th, timed to coincide with European Union energy negotiations. Russia had been threatening to cut natural gas supplies to Western Europe over pipeline disputes. American energy companies wanted to fill the gap with liquefied natural gas shipped from Texas and Louisiana. A polar vortex would create an energy crisis that would force Europe to sign exclusive contracts with American suppliers. It would also demonstrate American weather modification capabilities to any nation considering energy independence from US corporations. Tempest Gate required the most sophisticated atmospheric manipulation we'd ever attempted. We had to destabilize the Arctic Oscillation, the atmospheric pattern that normally keeps polar air trapped near the North Pole. This involved coordinating ionospheric heating across 7 different HARP facilities, creating thermal disruptions in the jet stream that would allow Arctic air to flow south into populated regions. I worked for 10 days preparing the models. The mathematics were beautiful in their complexity, hundreds of variables balanced in precise equilibrium, like conducting a symphony orchestra made of storm systems. It was the most challenging scientific problem I'd ever solved. It was also the most evil thing I'd ever done. The operation launched at 0600 GMT on January 15th. Within hours, we'd created thermal instabilities in the ionosphere above Greenland that began affecting jet stream patterns across the North Atlantic. Cold air started flowing south from the Arctic Ocean, building into a massive high-pressure dome that stretched from Iceland to the Black Sea. For 2 weeks, Europe froze. Temperatures in London dropped to minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Paris saw minus 20 degrees. Berlin recorded minus 30 degrees. Natural gas demand overwhelmed supply systems. Rolling blackouts affected 50 million people. Transportation shut down across the continent. The death toll reached 40,000 people. Most were elderly, victims of hypothermia when heating systems failed. Others died in traffic accidents on ice-covered roads, in fires caused by overloaded electrical systems, in carbon monoxide poisoning from improvised heating methods. International media called it the worst winter in European history. Climate scientists blamed a once-in-a-millennium disruption of Arctic weather patterns. The European Union declared a continental emergency and signed emergency energy contracts with American suppliers at triple the normal rates. The contracts were worth $340 billion over 10 years. On February 1st, President Obama announced a new transatlantic energy partnership that would make America Europe's primary natural gas supplier. The signing ceremony was held in the Rose Garden, with executives from Texas energy companies standing behind the president as he praised American innovation in meeting global energy needs. Nobody mentioned that the crisis requiring American energy had been created by American weapons. That night, I sat in my quarters and tried to calculate how many people had died per dollar of the new energy contracts. The mathematics were simple. 40,000 deaths divided by $340 billion equals 0.000118 deaths per dollar. Each dollar of American energy profit had cost about 1/10,000th of a human life. I'd become very good at that kind of calculation. I called Chen and told her I wanted to see Emma. "That's not possible," she said. "I just killed 40,000 people for your energy contracts. I want to see my daughter." "Emma is safe and comfortable. That should be enough." "It's not enough. I want proof that she's alive. I want to talk to her." "Malcolm, you're not in a position to make demands." "Yes, I am. You need me more than I need you." There are maybe 12 people in the world who understand atmospheric manipulation at the level required for operations like Tempest Gate. You can't just replace me. A week later, they brought Emma to Alaska. She was thinner than in the photograph, but she looked healthy. They let us have dinner together in a secure conference room, with guards posted outside and recording equipment monitoring our conversation. "Dad, what is this place?" she asked. "Weather Research Facility." "Bullshit. I know what HAAARP is. I know what you people do here." She was 24 years old, brilliant, angry, and completely correct about everything. "Emma, please, let's talk about other things." "Other things?" "Dad, do you have any idea what's been happening in the world? The weather has gone completely insane. The European freeze killed more people than some wars. The Pakistani floods last year displaced 12 million people. Hurricane season has become a year-round phenomenon." She leaned forward across the conference table. "And the patterns, Dad. I've been analysing them for 4 years now. Every major weather disaster coincides with geopolitical events. Every unprecedented storm serves American strategic interests. Someone is controlling the weather, and I think you know who." I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to explain how we'd been trapped, how her safety depended on my cooperation, how I'd become a monster to protect her. I wanted to apologise for every storm I'd steered, every drought I'd created, every life I'd taken with radio waves and atmospheric manipulation. Instead, I said, "I work on radio communications research. You're lying. I'm trying to keep you alive." She stared at me for a long moment, then she reached across the table and took my hand. "Dad, whatever they've got you doing, whatever they're holding over you, it's not worth it. People are dying. The climate is being weaponized. Someone has to stop this. It's not that simple. It is that simple. Choose the right side." A guard knocked on the door. Our time was up. As they led Emma away, she looked back at me. "I love you, Dad, but I can't forgive this." I never saw her again. December 15th, 2012. After Emma's visit, something changed in me. Not redemption, nothing that clean or hopeful, just a kind of hollow clarity about what I'd become and why I couldn't stop being it. They moved Emma to a different facility. The photographs stopped coming. Chen told me she was comfortable and pursuing educational opportunities, but wouldn't provide details. For all I knew, she was dead. For all I knew, she'd never been alive after her disappearance. But I couldn't risk it. As long as there was a possibility that Emma's survival depended on my cooperation, I couldn't stop working. They'd created the perfect prisoner, someone who collaborated not because he believed in the mission, but because he couldn't afford to believe it was wrong. Over the next year, I helped orchestrate 17 weather operations. Drought in Syria during the early stages of civil unrest, destabilizing food supplies and forcing rural populations into cities where they could be more easily controlled. Hurricane enhancement off the coast of Japan, providing cover for renegotiating defense treaties after natural disaster revealed infrastructure vulnerabilities. Heat waves in Greece during debt restructuring negotiations, creating energy crises that forced acceptance of austerity measures. Flooding in Pakistan's cotton-growing regions, driving up global textile prices and benefiting American agricultural exports. Arctic ice manipulation to open new shipping routes controlled by US military contractors. Each operation was more sophisticated than the last. We'd learned to layer weather events, creating cascading effects that looked entirely natural. A drought would weaken a government, making it vulnerable to the floods that followed. A heat wave would stress electrical grids, making them susceptible to the storms that came next. We were playing three-dimensional chess with the planet's climate, and we always won because our opponents didn't know they were playing. I got better at the work, frighteningly better. I could calculate the economic impact of a hurricane with the same precision I'd once used to predict pressure differentials. I could estimate casualty rates for different types of weather events. I could design atmospheric conditions that would kill specific numbers of people in specific regions for specific strategic purposes. I'd become a weapon myself, a human component in a system designed to use climate as a tool of control. Chen noticed my improved performance during our quarterly review. "You're doing excellent work," she said. "Some of your recent atmospheric models have been genuinely innovative. Thank you. You seem more focused, less conflicted." I looked at her across her pristine office, with its weather maps and satellite displays and photographs of successful operations. Dr. Sarah Chen, who taught me to make it rain and helped me learn to kill with storms. "I understand my position now," I said, "which is, I'm not a scientist anymore, I'm a lever." She smiled. It was the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in years. "Exactly. And levers don't make moral judgments. They just apply force where directed." That night I sat in my quarters and wrote the first entry in this journal, not because I thought anyone would ever read it, but because I needed to document what I'd done, what I'd become, what we'd all become. I needed to create a record of the machine we'd built, a machine that could reach into the sky and turn weather into war, that could kill thousands of people with radio waves and atmospheric mathematics, that could hold the entire planet hostage to American strategic interests. A machine powered by brilliant scientists who'd convinced themselves they were saving the world. A machine operated by a father who'd trade any number of other people's children for the possibility that his own daughter might still be alive. A machine that ran on the most renewable resource of all, human compromise. June 16th, 2025. I'm 52 years old now. I've been with Project Stratos for 18 years. The program has expanded far beyond what we imagined in 2007. We now operate weather modification arrays on 6 continents, coordinate with military satellite networks, and maintain real-time atmospheric control over most of the planet. The public still doesn't know. Climate scientists still publish papers about unprecedented weather patterns and unexplained atmospheric anomalies. Environmental activists still protest government inaction on climate change, not knowing that the government has been actively managing climate for decades. Emma would be 36 now if she's still alive. I imagine her sometimes married, maybe with children of her own, living somewhere far from Alaska under a different name. Sometimes I imagine her working for the program, recruited the same way I was, told that her cooperation would help keep me safe. Sometimes I imagine her dead, killed years ago when my usefulness to the program began to decline. I don't know which scenario is worse. The work continues. Just last month we created a typhoon that disrupted Chinese shipping routes during trade negotiations. Next week we're planning a drought in East Africa to destabilise a government that's been nationalising copper mines. In the fall, we'll probably enhance hurricane season to provide cover for FEMA exercises that are really tests of martial law protocols. Each operation is routine now. I calculate atmospheric conditions the way other people calculate mortgage payments, with mechanical precision and no emotional involvement. The deaths are statistics. The suffering is necessary for global stability. The lies are required for national security. I've become very good at my job. The worst part isn't the guilt. I processed that years ago. The worst part is how normal it all feels. How easily the human mind adapts to orchestrating mass destruction. How quickly catastrophe becomes administrative routine. Chen retired last year. They brought in a younger replacement doctor, James Morrison, who specialises in something called microclimate targeting, weather modification focused on areas as small as individual city blocks. He's working on techniques that could create localised tornadoes, precision lightning strikes and targeted hail storms. The future of weather warfare is becoming more surgical, more deniable, more efficient. We're moving beyond blunt instruments, Morrison explained during his first staff meeting. Why flood an entire region when you can flood just the neighbourhoods where opposition leaders live? Why create a continental drought when you can target specific agricultural districts? The technology keeps improving. The targeting keeps getting more precise. The number of people who know the truth keeps getting smaller. And I keep sitting in the same chair watching storms I designed ravage countries I'll never visit, calculating the mathematics of suffering with the same detached precision I once used to study pressure systems over the Bering Sea today. If you're reading this, it means the permafrost finally thawed enough for someone to find the container I buried outside the HARP facility in 2013, it means I'm probably dead, either from old age or because someone finally decided I knew too much, or because I finally worked up the courage to stop being useful to the program. These journals contain everything: technical specifications for weather modification systems, target lists for atmospheric operations, casualty assessments for major weather events between 2007 and 2025, financial records connecting energy companies to weather warfare programs, personnel files for Project Stratos operation staff. It's all here. 18 years of crimes against humanity, documented in the handwriting of one of the primary perpetrators. I'm not writing this because I expect it to change anything. The people who run these programs are too powerful, too well connected, too essential to national security infrastructure. The public is too distracted by the weather disasters we create to question their origins. The media is too dependent on government sources to investigate government weather modification. Even if these journals were published tomorrow, most people wouldn't believe them. Weather control sounds like science fiction. Atmospheric manipulation sounds like conspiracy theory. The idea that hurricanes and droughts and heat waves could be artificial weapons sounds too terrible to be true. But it is true, all of it. I'm writing this because someone should know. Someone should understand what we built here in Alaska, what we did with radio waves and atmospheric mathematics, what we sacrificed in the name of global stability. Someone should know that weather is not natural anymore, that every major storm, every unprecedented heat wave, every record-breaking drought is potentially artificial. That climate change isn't just happening to us, it's being done to us, by us, for reasons that have nothing to do with environmental protection and everything to do with power. Someone should know that there are people who can reach into the sky and turn weather into war. Someone should know that I was one of them. My name is Dr. Malcolm Greaves. I was an atmospheric physicist and chief engineer for Project Stratos, a classified weather modification program operating under the HAARP research facility in Gakona, Alaska. I helped build the machine that controls the world's weather. I helped turn the sky into a weapon. I helped kill thousands of people with storms and droughts and heat waves, all in service of American strategic interests. And I did it all to protect my daughter, who may have been dead for 15 years. If I die, it changes nothing. If I speak, no one will believe me. But at least someone will know. At least someone will understand that when the storms come, and they will keep coming, stronger and stranger and more precisely targeted than anything nature ever created, they're not accidents of climate change. They're weapons. And somewhere in Alaska there's still a man sitting in a chair, watching weather maps on computer screens, calculating the mathematics of suffering with the detached precision of someone who learned long ago that conscience is a luxury he can't afford. Somewhere in Alaska the machine is still running, the storms are still coming, and the sky is still not safe. Former deep-sea engineer, NASA Oceanic Division, 1957 to 1963, declassified, March 15th, 2023, classification level, redacted, date, September 12th, 1957, location, classified research facility, Point Reyes, California. My name is Dr. Evan Hartley, and if you're reading this, then either I'm dead, or the world finally deserves to know the truth about why NASA abandoned the ocean for the stars. I'm 39 years old, an oceanographer by training, and until 6 years ago I believed the deepest mysteries of our planet lay in the cosmic void above us. I was wrong, catastrophically, terrifyingly wrong. When NASA was established in July of 1958, the public narrative was simple. America needed to compete with the Soviets in space. What they didn't tell you was that NASA's original charter included extensive deep-sea exploration programs run parallel to our early aviation development. Before we ever dreamed of touching the moon, we were diving deeper into our own planet than any human had gone before. I was recruited in late 1957, months before NASA's official formation. The letter arrived on Yale University letterhead, but the signature was from someone I'd never heard of, Dr. Marcus Webb, Director of Aquatic Research, National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. The offer was generous. Triple my university salary, unlimited research budget, and access to the most advanced submersible technology ever developed. The catch? I couldn't tell anyone where I was going or what I was doing. Not my wife, Sarah, not my colleagues, not even my mother. The facility at Point Reyes looked innocuous enough from the surface, a collection of weathered buildings perched on the California coastline, indistinguishable from a dozen other government research stations. But beneath those structures lay something extraordinary, a vertical shaft descending 300 feet straight down into the bedrock, wide enough to accommodate submersibles the size of small buildings. Dr. Webb met me on my first day, a gaunt man in his 60s with prematurely white hair and the kind of hollow stare I'd later recognise in combat veterans. "Welcome to Project Nautilus, Doctor. Hartley," he said, leading me through a maze of steel corridors that hummed with the constant vibration of massive machinery. "I trust you understand the sensitive nature of our work here." "Oceanic mapping," I replied, reciting the vague description from my recruitment letter. "Deep-sea cartography for national defence purposes." Webb stopped walking and turned to face me. "That's the public explanation, yes, but you'll find that the ocean holds more secrets than any map could ever reveal." He led me to an observation deck overlooking the central shaft. Below us, suspended by massive cables, hung the most beautiful machine I'd ever seen. The submersible was unlike anything in the civilian world, a sleek, elongated sphere of titanium and steel, bristling with cameras, sonar arrays and collection arms. According to Webb, it could dive to depths of 15,000 metres and withstand pressures that would crush a conventional submarine like an eggshell. "We call her the Cousteau," Webb said, after the French explorer. "She's taken us places that don't exist on any official chart." Over the following weeks, I learned the true scope of Project Nautilus. We weren't just mapping the ocean floor, we were investigating anomalies. Specifically, non-terrestrial acoustic signatures detected by Navy hydrophones in the deepest parts of the Pacific. These weren't whale songs or geological activity, they were patterns, rhythmic, mathematical, and utterly alien. The first recording was made in 1954, Webb explained during one of our late-night briefings. A hydrophone array near the Mariana Trench picked up a sound unlike anything in our databases. The frequency was too low for marine life, too regular for tectonic activity. When we mapped the source, it originated from a depth of nearly 11,000 metres, deeper than anything should be able to survive. He played the recording for me on the facility's most advanced audio equipment. Even filtered through speakers, the sound made my teeth ache. It was a low rhythmic pulse, lub-dub, 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 like a massive heartbeat echoing from the bottom of the world. "How many recordings do you have?" I asked. "Hundreds, from trenches across the Pacific, the Mariana, the Tonga, the Kermadec, all at depths between 10 and 15,000 metres, all following the same pattern." Webb's face was grim. "And Dr. Hartley? They're getting stronger." Date: November the 3rd, 1959. Location: Pacific Ocean, 275 nautical miles southwest of Guam depth, 13,247 metres. Our third deep dive began like all the others: methodical preparation, systems checks, and the familiar ritual of descent into darkness. I was accompanied by Dr. James Morrison, our marine biologist, and Chief Petty Officer Samuel Torres, our dive specialist on loan from the Navy's most classified underwater programs. The Cousteau began her descent at 0800 hours, slipping through the ocean's layers like a steel teardrop. At 1,000 metres, we left the last traces of sunlight behind. At 5,000, we entered the abyssal zone, where no natural light had ever penetrated. By 8,000 metres, we were in territory that belonged more to the moon than to Earth. But it was at 13,000 metres that we found something that shouldn't exist. "Sonar contact," Torres announced, his voice tight with concentration. "Dead ahead, range 200 metres. It's big." Through the Cousteau's reinforced viewport, our floodlights illuminated a sight that defied explanation. Rising from the sea floor like an ancient mountain was a structure, but not a natural one. The surface was covered in perfectly hexagonal panels, each one roughly 30 feet across, arranged in a pattern too precise to be geological. "Are you recording this?" Morrison whispered, his face pressed against the observation port. "Everything," I confirmed, though my hands were shaking as I operated the cameras. "How large do you estimate it to be?" Torres was studying the sonar display with growing amazement. "The structure extends at least 800 meters in diameter, but the depth, Jesus Christ, it goes down another 2,000 meters from here." As we approached the structure, our instruments began registering impossible readings. The water pressure at this depth should have been crushing, over 1,300 times the pressure at sea level, but our gauges showed localized areas where the pressure dropped significantly, as if something was actively counteracting the ocean's weight. "That's impossible," Morrison muttered. "Nothing could survive down here, let alone generate enough force to create pressure anomalies." But something had survived. As we manoeuvred closer to the hexagonal surface, our audio pickups detected it. That same rhythmic pulse we'd been tracking for years, but now so powerful it resonated through the Cousteau's hull like the beating of a massive heart. "It's not coming from the structure," Torres reported, studying his instruments. "It's coming from beneath it." That's when Morrison made the decision that would haunt us all. Against protocol, he suited up in one of our experimental deep-sea diving suits and insisted on collecting a sample from the structure's surface. The suit was a marvel of engineering, a self-contained environment that could theoretically protect a human at crushing depths. "Just a quick sample," he said through the comm system as he prepared to exit the submersible. "We need physical evidence." I should have stopped him. I should have ordered Torres to abort the dive and return to the surface. Instead, I watched through the Cousteau's cameras as Morrison emerged from the airlock and approached the alien structure. For 20 minutes, everything proceeded normally. Morrison collected samples from the hexagonal panels, documenting their composition and arrangement. His reading showed materials that didn't match any known elements, compounds with atomic structures that seemed to shift and change even as he observed them. Then the pulse stopped. The silence was absolute. No marine life, no geological noise, no equipment hum, just the complete suffocating quiet of the deep ocean. Through our cameras, we watched Morrison frozen beside the structure, his helmet lights casting stark shadows across the hexagonal surface. "Morrison, report," I called into the comm. "What's your status?" His response, when it came, was barely a whisper. "It knows we're here." The structure began to glow. It wasn't bright, more like bioluminescence than artificial light, but it was unmistakably deliberate. The hexagonal panels pulsed in sequence, creating patterns that moved across the surface like neural networks firing, and with each pulse that rhythmic beating returned stronger than before. "Morrison, get back to the sub, now!" But Morrison wasn't moving. Through the camera feeds I could see him standing motionless, his helmet pressed against one of the glowing panels as if he was listening to something we couldn't hear. "Can't you hear it?" His voice crackled through the comm, distorted by interference that shouldn't exist at our depth. "It's not dead. It's dreaming." Torres was already suiting up. "I'm going after him." But before Torres could exit the airlock, Morrison began moving again, not toward us, but along the structure's surface, following the patterns of light like a moth drawn to flame. His movements were wrong, too fluid, as if the crushing pressure had no effect on him. "Morrison, you're exceeding safe operational limits," I warned. "Return to the submersible immediately." "So beautiful," Morrison's voice was dreamy, distant. "It's been dreaming for so long, dreaming of the surface, dreaming of the sky." The structure's glow intensified, and Morrison stopped. Through our cameras, we watched him turn back toward the Cousteau, but something was wrong with his posture, with the way he moved. When his helmet lights illuminated his faceplate, Torres cursed. Morrison's eyes were gone, not damaged. Gone, as if they had never existed. But he was still moving, still navigating perfectly through the crushing darkness. "It wants to wake up," Morrison said, his voice now coming from multiple directions at once, as if the ocean itself was speaking. "It's been sleeping so long, but the dreams are getting stronger. Soon it won't need to dream anymore." That's when Torres made the hardest decision of his naval career. He activated the Cousteau's emergency ascent system, cutting Morrison's tether and abandoning him to the depths. As we rose toward the surface, our last image of the structure showed Morrison standing motionless among the glowing hexagons, his arms spread wide as if embracing something we couldn't see. The rhythmic pulse followed us up through 13,000 metres of black water, growing fainter but never disappearing entirely. Morrison's body was never recovered. Officially, he suffered a catastrophic equipment failure during a routine deep-sea research dive. His wife received a flag and a commendation for his service to scientific progress. But for 3 days after we surfaced, I could hear him whispering in my quarters at night, "It's not dead. It's dreaming." Date: February 15th, 1963. Location: Point Reyes Research Facility. The end came without warning, which should have been warning enough. I arrived at the facility on a cold February morning to find armed guards at every entrance, and men in dark suits loading equipment into unmarked trucks. Dr. Webb met me at the main gate, his face haggard and aged beyond his years. "Project Nautilus is terminated, effective immediately," he said without preamble. "All personnel are to report for debriefing and reassignment." What happened? Did we have another incident? Webb glanced at the suited men supervising the equipment removal. "Walk with me, Doctor. Hartley." We moved away from the main buildings toward the cliff overlooking the Pacific. The morning fog was thick, obscuring the horizon and muffling our conversation. 3 days ago, our satellite thermal imaging detected massive heat signatures rising from the deepest points of the Pacific Basin, Webb said quietly. Not geological. The patterns were too organised, too purposeful. Something down there is powering up. I felt ice forming in my stomach. The structures we found, all of them, simultaneous activation across 17 different trench systems. The energy readings are off the charts. We're talking about power generation on the scale of nuclear reactors, but using principles we don't understand. Webb pulled a manila folder from his coat and handed it to me. Inside were thermal satellite images showing the ocean floor lit up like a Christmas tree, with bright spots clustered around the deepest trenches. NASA is shifting all funding to space exploration, Webb continued. Officially, oceanic research is being transferred to civilian agencies. Unofficially, ... He gestured toward the men loading trucks. There will be no more official oceanic research. They're covering it up. They're prioritising. Space exploration offers hope, progress, a bright future for humanity. What we found down there... Webb shook his head. What we found offers only questions we're not ready to answer. The debriefing took place in a windowless room with men who never gave their names. They confiscated all my research notes, my personal logs, even photographs of my family that had been in my desk drawer. In exchange, I received a generous severance package, a glowing letter of recommendation, and a document that would send me to federal prison if I ever spoke publicly about Project Nautilus. "Dr. Hartley," the lead interrogator said as the session concluded, "you've served your country with distinction. We trust you understand the importance of maintaining operational security regarding your work here. What about Morrison? What about the others who didn't come back?" The man's expression didn't change. "I'm not familiar with any such incidents. Project Nautilus was a mapping and research operation. All personnel completed their assignments successfully." I was escorted from the facility that same day. As our car pulled away from Point Reyes, I looked back to see smoke rising from the equipment disposal area. They were burning everything: documents, photographs, even the submersibles that had taken us to the bottom of the world. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from NASA headquarters. I had been selected for reassignment to their new Lunar Surface Analysis Division, effective immediately. The salary was excellent, the work was prestigious, and the security clearance was higher than anything I'd held before. I declined the position. 3 months after that, I was quietly discharged from government service entirely. My security clearance was revoked, my research credentials were questioned, and my applications to private sector positions were mysteriously rejected. Dr. Evan Hartley, former deep-sea explorer, became Dr. Evan Hartley, unemployed oceanographer with a suspicious gap in his resume. But I wasn't the only one asking questions. Dr. Patricia Vance had been a communications specialist on Project Nautilus, responsible for analysing the acoustic signatures we'd detected. Like me, she'd been debriefed, reassigned, and eventually discharged. Unlike me, she'd managed to keep copies of some critical data. We met at a coffee shop in San Francisco 6 months after the project's termination. Patricia looked older, more cautious, but her eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made her invaluable to the project. "I've been thinking about what we found down there," she said, stirring her coffee with nervous energy. "The patterns in those acoustic signatures, they weren't random." "What do you mean?" "I mean they were mathematical. Prime number sequences, Fibonacci progressions, geometric ratios that appear in nature. Whatever's down there isn't just making noise, it's trying to communicate." Patricia slid a manila envelope across the table. I kept copies of everything. The acoustic data, the thermal readings, even some of Morrison's final transmissions before... She trailed off. "Before he disappeared. Before he was taken. There's a difference, Evan. Morrison didn't have an equipment failure. Something down there wanted him, and it got him." Inside the envelope were documents I'd never seen before. Classified reports dated after Project Nautilus was terminated. According to Patricia, she'd obtained them through a contact at NOAA who was asking similar questions about unexplained oceanic phenomena. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a thermal satellite image dated March 1963. 3 weeks after they shut us down, every heat signature we detected went dormant. Complete thermal silence across all 17 sites. Maybe whatever was down there powered down. Or maybe it finished powering up. Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper. "Evan, I think they didn't shut down Project Nautilus because we weren't finding anything. I think they shut it down because we found exactly what they were afraid we'd find." She was right, but I wouldn't understand how right until much later. Date: October 12th, 1969. Location: San Francisco Public Library. 6 years of unemployment had given me ample time to research, and what I discovered made me wish I'd never heard of Project Nautilus. Patricia had been found dead in her apartment 3 months after our coffee shop meeting. The official cause was suicide by overdose, but Patricia had never shown signs of depression, and she'd been meticulously healthy her entire life. Her research materials were missing, though the police report made no mention of a break-in. Her death convinced me that someone was systematically eliminating former Project Nautilus personnel. I began living under assumed names, paying cash for everything, and avoiding any contact with my former life. Sarah had divorced me 2 years earlier, citing my paranoid behaviour and refusal to discuss my government work. I couldn't blame her, but I couldn't stop investigating either. The breakthrough came when I gained access to the library's microfilm archives. Using contacts from my university days, I'd managed to obtain partial access codes for NOAA and NASA's declassified research databases. What I found there changed everything I thought I knew about our planet's history. The files were scattered across different agencies and classification levels, but when assembled they told a coherent and terrifying story. In 1962, 1 year before Project Nautilus was terminated, an unmanned deep-sea probe had been sent to investigate the thermal anomalies we'd detected. The probe, designated Deep Eye 7, was equipped with the most advanced cameras and sensors available, capable of operating at depths exceeding 15,000 metres. Deep Eye 7 reached the bottom of the Mariana Trench on September 15th, 1962. For 6 hours, it transmitted normal operational data, water temperature, pressure readings, geological samples. Then, at 13,247 metres depth, it encountered something that changed the course of human history. The final transmission from Deep Eye 7 lasted 37 seconds. I found the transcript buried in a sub-basement archive that officially didn't exist. Deep Eye 7, final transmission. Date September 15th, 1962. Time 14:27:33 GMT depth, 13,247 metres. Static. Control. This is Deep Eye. I'm seeing... Wait, there's something down here. Something big. Pause. 4 seconds. Control, are you getting this video feed? The entire seafloor is... It's not seafloor. It's a surface. Artificial. Covered in those hexagonal patterns we've been tracking. Pause. 7 seconds. Oh God. Oh Jesus Christ. Control. There's an eye. There's an eye in the ocean floor and it's looking at me. It's the size of a building and it's looking right at... Signal terminated. The file was marked with a classification I'd never seen before. CFR. Classified for religious reasons. Attached to the transcript was a single photograph, grainy and overexposed, but unmistakably showing the ocean floor at crushing depth. In the centre of the image was a circular structure approximately 200 metres in diameter. The structure's surface was smooth, almost organic, and divided into segments like the iris of a massive eye. But it wasn't the size that made my hand shake as I examined the photograph. It was the intelligence behind it, an awareness so ancient and vast that it made humanity look like insects scurrying across the surface of something beyond our comprehension. I spent weeks researching the CFR classification, eventually discovering that it had been created specifically for Project Nautilus findings. According to a memo I found buried in the Vatican Scientific Archives, representatives from major world religions had been consulted about our discoveries in 1962. Their unanimous recommendation was immediate and permanent suppression of all related research. The memo, signed by officials from Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism and Hinduism, stated that the deep-sea discoveries represented theological challenges that could undermine the fundamental spiritual frameworks upon which human civilization depends. But the most disturbing discovery came when I cross-referenced our sonar maps with historical and mythological texts. The locations of our thermal anomalies corresponded exactly with the legendary resting places of ancient sea monsters described in cultures across the world. The Mariana Trench aligned with Babylonian accounts of Tiamat, the primordial chaos monster of the deep. The Tonga Trench matched Polynesian legends of Tangaroa's sleeping guardians. The Puerto Rico Trench corresponded to pre-Columbian accounts of Xipactli, the earth crocodile that dwelled at the bottom of the world. These weren't metaphors or mythological abstractions, they were maps. Ancient civilizations had known about the entities in the deep ocean, and had developed elaborate religious and cultural systems to ensure they remained undisturbed. The taboos against deep-sea exploration, the fear of the ocean's depths, the universal human terror of dark water, these weren't superstitions, they were survival instincts. I found records of other expeditions that had encountered similar phenomena. In 1847, the British Royal Navy had lost contact with HMS Erebus during an Arctic expedition. The final transmission, according to classified Admiralty records I found in London, described great eyes beneath the ice watching from depths that have no bottom. A French bathysphere expedition in 1934 had reported geometric structures of impossible size at the bottom of the Mediterranean before radio contact was lost. The crew was never recovered, but local fishermen reported strange lights rising from deep water for months afterward. Even the famous Titanic disaster showed signs of something more sinister than an iceberg collision. According to testimony from survivors that was excluded from official inquiries, passengers reported seeing lights moving beneath the ship in the moments before impact. The pattern was clear. Humanity had been encountering these entities for centuries, but we'd always been smart enough, or lucky enough, to retreat before awakening something that was better left sleeping, until Project Nautilus. Date: March 3rd, 1973. Location withheld. I made the decision to go public on a cold Tuesday morning after reading about another unexplained deep-sea incident in the newspaper. A Soviet research vessel had vanished in the Kuriil Trench, with the last transmission reporting massive bioluminescent phenomena at maximum depth. The pattern was escalating. Every few months, another deep-sea expedition would encounter something that defied explanation. The official responses were always the same: equipment failure, human error, natural phenomena. But the incidents were becoming too frequent, too consistent, and too terrifying to dismiss. I contacted Dr. William Hartmann, a respected marine biologist at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and arranged to meet him at his laboratory. Hartmann had published papers questioning the official explanations for various oceanic anomalies, making him sympathetic to alternative theories. "Dr. Hartley," Hartmann said as he reviewed my materials, "if even half of what you're telling me is true, this represents the most significant discovery in human history. It's all true. Every photograph, every recording, every document. I've spent 11 years verifying these findings." Hartmann studied the thermal satellite images with growing amazement. "These energy signatures, they're not geological. The power requirements alone would exceed anything natural. What do you think they are? I think they're living entities, ancient, intelligent, and vast beyond our comprehension. I think they've been dormant on the ocean floor for millennia, and our deep-sea exploration has begun to wake them up. That's..." Hartmann paused, considering the implications. "That's terrifying." "It gets worse. I believe the government has known about these entities since at least 1962. They shut down oceanic research not because they found nothing, but because they found something so threatening that it forced them to redirect humanity's entire exploration focus towards space." I showed Hartmann the classified documents, the acoustic recordings, the photographs from Deep I-7. With each piece of evidence, his expression grew more troubled. "We need to publish this," he said finally. "The scientific community deserves to know." "I've tried. Every major journal has rejected my submissions without review. Publishers won't return my calls. Academic conferences refuse my presentation proposals. There's been a systematic campaign to discredit and silence me." Hartmann was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want from me?" "Help me get this information out. You have credibility, connections, a platform. People will listen to you. And if they try to silence me too, then at least we'll know I'm not paranoid." Hartmann agreed to help, but our collaboration was short-lived. 3 days after our meeting, he called me in a panic. "They've been here," he said, his voice shaking. "Men in suits, government credentials. They confiscated all the materials you gave me and threatened to revoke my research funding if I continue investigating this." "What did you tell them?" "Nothing." "But Evan, they knew details about our conversation that they shouldn't have known. They're monitoring everything, phones, mail, probably this call too. That was the last time I spoke to Dr. Hartmann." His subsequent research focused exclusively on conventional marine biology, and he never again published anything that questioned official explanations for oceanic phenomena. I realized then that going public through traditional channels was impossible. The conspiracy to suppress information about the deep-sea entities extended throughout the scientific establishment, the government, and possibly beyond. Any attempt to reveal the truth would be met with career destruction, personal discrediting, or worse. But I had to try something. I began writing anonymous letters to newspaper editors, magazine publishers, and television producers, sending them copies of the most compelling evidence without identifying myself. The response was always the same. No interest, no follow-up, no investigation. It was as if the entire media apparatus had been programmed to ignore anything related to deep-sea anomalies. My final attempt at revelation came in 1974, when I managed to schedule a meeting with Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. Woodward had just finished breaking the Watergate story and seemed like someone who might be interested in government cover-ups. We met at a restaurant in Georgetown, and I presented him with a condensed version of my findings. Woodward listened intently, asked intelligent questions, and seemed genuinely intrigued by the implications. "This is extraordinary," he said, reviewing the photographs from Deep I-7. "If authentic, this represents a cover-up that makes Watergate look like a parking ticket. It's authentic. I can provide documentation, witness testimony, even the locations where you can verify some of these findings. What do you want me to do with this?" "Investigate. Use your resources, your connections. Find other people who are involved in these projects and get them to talk." Woodward promised to look into the story, but I never heard from him again. When I called the Post a month later, his secretary told me he was no longer taking calls about that ocean thing. I later learned that the Post had received visits from federal agents shortly after our meeting. The official explanation was a routine security review related to Woodward's Watergate sources, but the timing was too convenient to be coincidental. That's when I realized the scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just a government cover-up, it was a coordinated effort involving multiple agencies, international governments, religious organisations and media outlets. The suppression of information about the deep-sea entities was the most successful conspiracy in human history, and I was completely alone in fighting it. Date: December 31st, 1979. Location withheld. This will be my final entry in this log. Tomorrow I'm going into hiding permanently, destroying my remaining research materials and attempting to disappear entirely from public records. The forces arrayed against me have grown too powerful, too persistent, and too dangerous to continue this investigation. But before I vanish, I need to leave a warning for anyone who might discover this account in the future. 3 weeks ago, I was approached by someone claiming to be a former colleague from Project Nautilus. The man identified himself as Dr. Richard Kellerman, though I had no memory of anyone by that name working on the project. He said he had new information about the entities we'd discovered and suggested we meet at a secluded location to discuss it. Against my better judgment, I agreed to the meeting. Dr. Kellerman met me at a rest stop along Highway 101, far from any populated areas. He was a thin, nervous man in his 50s, with the kind of haunted expression I'd learned to recognise in people who'd seen too much of the ocean's secrets. "Dr. Hartley," he said as we walked away from the parking area, "I've been following your research for years. What you've discovered about the deep-sea entities is important, but it's also incomplete. What do you mean? You think they're sleeping, waiting to be awakened by human exploration? But that's not correct. They're already awake. They've been awake for decades. What we found down there in the 60s wasn't the beginning of their activity. It was the end of their patience." Kellerman handed me a folder containing documents I'd never seen before. According to the papers, classified monitoring stations had been detecting increased activity from the deep-sea entities since 1965. The rhythmic pulses we'd recorded were accelerating, the thermal signatures were growing stronger, and new acoustic patterns had emerged that suggested coordinated behaviour across multiple sites. "They're not just awakening," Kellerman continued. "They're communicating, organising, preparing for something." The most disturbing document in the folder was a projection analysis dated 1978. Based on the accelerating pattern of activity, government scientists estimated that the entities would reach full activation threshold sometime in the early 21st century. "What happens then?" I asked. "We don't know, but the analysis suggests it won't be compatible with continued human civilization." Kellerman explained that the government's response had evolved from suppression to preparation. While publicly denying the existence of the deep-sea entities, they'd been secretly developing contingency plans for what they called Event Leviathan, the moment when the entities would emerge from their oceanic domain. Space exploration wasn't just a distraction from oceanic research, Kellerman said. It was preparation for evacuation. If the entities become active, Earth may no longer be habitable for humanity. I realised then why NASA had shifted so dramatically from ocean to space exploration. They weren't running toward the stars, they were running away from the depths. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because someone needs to know. Someone outside the official channels needs to understand what's coming." Kellerman left me with the documents and a final warning. "Stop your public investigations. They've been tolerating your research because you're working alone and no one believes you. But if you get too close to the truth, if you start convincing people, they'll stop tolerating you." "Who will?" "Everyone. The government, the military, the religious organisations, even the entities themselves. You think they don't know about your research? You think they can't reach beyond the ocean when they choose to?" 3 days after my meeting with Kellerman, I woke up to find my apartment ransacked. Nothing had been stolen, but every piece of research material had been carefully examined and returned to precisely the wrong locations. It was a message. "We know what you know, and we can reach you anywhere." That same week, I began experiencing the dreams. Every night I found myself standing on the deck of a ship in the middle of a dark ocean. The water around the vessel was perfectly calm, but beneath the surface I could see lights moving, vast geometric patterns that pulsed with the same rhythm we detected 30 years earlier in the Mariana Trench. In the dreams I could hear Morrison's voice, carried on wind that tasted of salt and pressure. It's not dead, Dr. Hartley. It's dreaming, and now it's dreaming of you. The dreams were so vivid, so consistent, that I began to wonder if they were actually dreams at all. Perhaps the entities had developed the ability to project themselves into human consciousness, to monitor and influence anyone who knew too much about their existence. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating regularly. I started seeing shadows moving beneath the surface of every body of water I encountered. Swimming pools, bathtubs, even glasses of drinking water. The ocean had followed me inland and there was nowhere left to hide. That's when I made the decision to end this investigation and disappear entirely from public life. But first, I needed to leave this record for anyone who might continue the search for truth after I'm gone. To whoever finds this log, the entities in the deep ocean are real, they are ancient, and they are preparing for something that will change the course of human history. The government knows about them and has been preparing for their emergence for decades. Our species' sudden focus on space exploration, our development of advanced aerospace technology, our dreams of colonizing other planets, these aren't signs of human ambition. They're signs of species-level survival instinct. The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet's surface. We've explored less than 5% of its depths. In that unexplored darkness, something vast and intelligent has been waiting, since before human civilization began. They stopped exploring the ocean not because there was nothing to find, but because they found something we were never meant to awaken. And now it's too late to put it back to sleep. If you're reading this in the 21st century, pay attention to the signs, watch for unexplained oceanic phenomena, listen for reports of deep-sea mining operations encountering technical difficulties. Notice how quickly such stories disappear from the news cycle. Most importantly, if you ever hear about rhythmic pulses detected in the deep ocean, if you see reports of massive bioluminescent displays in the abyss, if you witness water boiling from the depths without explanation, know that the countdown has begun. The sea didn't hide monsters, it preserved them, and now they're ready to reclaim what was always theirs. Dr. Evan Hartley. December 31st, 1979, final entry. TikTok post, user at Deep Sea Explorer, 2025, posted June 14th, 2025, views, 847,392. Caption, guys, something insane is happening off the coast of Guam. The water is literally boiling and there's this sound. Ocean mystery. Deep sea gas unexplained. Video shows churning ocean water with steam rising from the surface. In the background a low rhythmic pulse can be heard. Lub-dub, 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 growing stronger with each beat. The video ends abruptly as the phone's camera lens cracks, though no impact is visible. NOAA press release. June 15th, 2025 for immediate release. Geological survey reports minor seismic activity near Guam. Honolulu HI. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration reports that recent unusual water conditions observed near Guam are the result of minor underwater volcanic activity. Citizens are advised that the phenomena pose no threat to public safety. The rhythmic audio phenomena reported in social media posts are consistent with natural geological processes and should not be cause for concern. NOAA continues to monitor the situation and will provide updates as necessary. For more information, contact the NOAA press office at text message thread, June 15th, 2025. Contact Sarah Hartley Morrison. Sarah, did you see the news about Guam? Sarah, the water thing? Sarah, it's exactly what Evan used to talk about. Sarah, before he disappeared. Sarah, the sounds are the same. Sarah, oh God, what if he was right? Sarah, what if he was right about everything? Message failed to deliver. Contact unavailable. This number has been disconnected. Internal memo. Classification level, black. From Director of Operations to all department heads. Date, June 15th, 2025. Subject, Event Leviathan, Phase 1. Activation. Effective immediately, all personnel are to report to designated deep bunker facilities. Surface operations are suspended until further notice. The entities have achieved critical mass activation. Preliminary estimates suggest coordinated emergence within 72 hours. Space evacuation protocols are now in effect. Priority personnel will be transferred to orbital stations beginning 0600 hours. May God help us all. Final entry, found in Dr. Evan Hartley's abandoned research facility. Date, June 16th, 2025. Written in an unknown hand. They found me. After 46 years of hiding, they found me. Not the government, not the military. Them. I'm writing this as the water rises around my cabin. Though the nearest ocean is 300 miles away, the water is warm, and it glows with that familiar hexagonal pattern I first saw in 1959. Morrison was right. It's not dead. It's been dreaming. And now it's awake. The dreams I've been having for decades weren't dreams at all. They were memories. The memories of something so ancient that it remembers when the ocean was young. It's been watching us, learning from us, waiting for us to develop the technology it needs. Space exploration, satellite networks, global communications. We thought we were advancing as a species. We were building the tools for our own replacement. The entities don't want to destroy humanity. They want to absorb us, to add our knowledge, our creativity, our consciousness to their own vast intelligence. The ocean was never their prison. It was their nursery. And now they're ready to graduate. The water is at my ankles now. I can feel it calling to me, the same way it called to Morrison all those years ago. The pressure should be crushing me, but instead I feel peaceful. Like I'm finally coming home. I understand now why they shut down Project Nautilus. Not to hide the truth from humanity, but to give us time. Time to develop, to grow, to become worthy of joining something larger than ourselves. The ocean is rising, not just here, but everywhere. The reports are coming in from around the world. Coastal cities flooding, though the weather is clear. The water is glowing, and it's bringing them with it. By the time anyone reads this, it will be too late to stop what's coming. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we've been looking at this all wrong. Maybe we're not the victims of an alien invasion. Maybe we're the children, finally being called home. The water is at my chest now. I can see lights moving beneath the surface, not hostile, but welcoming, like the lights of a city seen from a great distance. I'm not afraid anymore. After 50 years of running, of hiding, of trying to warn people who wouldn't listen, I'm finally ready to stop. To whoever finds this, don't fight them. Don't fear them. They've been waiting for us longer than our species has existed. We were never meant to stay on the surface forever. The abyss was never empty. It was just waiting for us to be ready to fill it. The water is over my head now, but I can still breathe. I can still see, and I can hear them calling my name. And it's time to go home. It's time to go down. It's time to return to the deep. Recovered journal entry. Classification redacted. Subject: Eli Granger, independent journalist. Date range: July 15th to 18th, 2023. Location: Bohemian Grove, Monte Rio, California. The following document was recovered from an encrypted server farm in Iceland. The journalist's current whereabouts remain unknown. Ed. My name is Eli Granger, and I'm writing this because I may not live long enough to tell it in person. What I witnessed in the redwoods of Northern California will haunt me until my dying day, whenever that may come. It started 3 weeks ago with an email that shouldn't have existed. I was in my cramped Oakland apartment, nursing my third cup of coffee, and scrolling through encrypted channels where whistleblowers sometimes surface. My secure inbox pinged. A message from an address that was just a string of numbers and letters, routed through 7 different proxy servers. No subject line. Just an attachment and 4 lines of text. You want truth? Go to the redwoods. Bring a black suit and a quiet soul. July 15th to 18th. The fire reveals all. The attachment was a high-resolution scan of what appeared to be a guest registry for the Bohemian Grove. That mysterious all-male retreat where the world's most powerful men allegedly gather each summer to commune with nature. I'd written about the Grove before, relying on second-hand accounts and leaked photographs from the 1980s. But this was different. The names on the list made my blood run cold. Former presidents, current senators, military contractors whose companies I'd been investigating for years, CEOs of tech giants, pharmaceutical corporations, defense contractors, media moguls who controlled the narrative of entire nations, all scheduled to attend something called the Midsummer Encampment. At the bottom of the scan was a forged access pass with my photograph, a professional headshot I'd never sent to anyone, digitally altered to show me in a black suit and tie. The name read Edmund Gray, Logistics Consultant, Prometheus Industries. Someone with serious resources wanted me inside that grove. The question was why? I should have walked away, should have deleted the email and gone back to writing about municipal corruption and corporate tax avoidance. Safe stories. Stories that didn't get journalists killed. Instead, I packed a black suit and drove north to Sonoma County. The road to Monterey winds through some of the most beautiful country in California. Ancient redwoods tower over narrow highways, their canopy so thick that midday feels like twilight. It's the kind of place where you'd expect to find hippie communes and organic wineries, not shadowy cabals plotting the fate of nations. But as I learned in my Navy intelligence days, the most dangerous secrets are always hidden in the most innocent places. I parked at a motel in Gurneyville and walked the perimeter of the Bohemian Grove property that evening. 2,000 acres of private forest, surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Security cameras every 50 feet, motion sensors in the trees, the kind of setup you'd expect around a military installation, not a summer camp for rich men. The main gate was staffed by guards who looked more like special forces operators than private security. Black uniforms, tactical gear, the flat stare of men who'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. Whatever happened inside those redwoods, they were serious about keeping it secret. The forged pass worked perfectly, too perfectly. The guards scanned the barcode, checked my face against the photo, and waved me through without a second glance. Either the forger was a genius, or someone very powerful wanted me inside. Neither possibility was comforting. The grove itself was exactly as described in the leaked accounts I'd read. Massive redwood trees, some over 1,000 years old, stretched toward a canopy so thick it blocked out the sun. Gravel paths wound between rustic cabins and open-air lodges, each marked with whimsical names: Owl's Nest, Dragon's Den, Caveman's Lodge. It would have been charming if not for the underlying sense of wrongness that permeated everything. The other guests, I couldn't think of them as normal people, not after seeing that registry, moved through this camp with the easy confidence of men accustomed to absolute power. They wore casual clothes during the day, khakis, polo shirts, boat shoes, the uniform of American aristocracy. But their conversations, caught in fragments as I passed, revealed the true scope of their influence. The Shanghai Index will drop exactly 17%. Tell the secretary that Operation Nightfall is greenlit for October. Media blackout should hold for at least 72 hours. I posed as a logistics consultant, which gave me an excuse to wander the grounds with a clipboard and camera phone, confiscated at the gate and replaced with an approved device that couldn't access external networks. The cover story worked well enough. Rich men are accustomed to being served by invisible people who handle the mundane details of their lives. But as the day wore on, I began to notice the symbols. Owls everywhere. Carved into tree trunks, etched on building facades, worked into the designs of benches and lampposts. Not cute, friendly owls. These were stylized, angular, with eyes that seemed to follow you as you walked past. The largest was a 40-foot stone statue positioned on a small island in an artificial lake at the heart of the grove. Even in daylight, it radiated a sense of ancient malevolence. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned to find a man in his 70s watching me stare at the giant owl. Silver hair, expensive casual wear, the kind of artificial tan that comes from winters in Palm Beach. His eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost colourless. The Owl of Bohemia, he continued, joining me at the lake's edge. Been watching over this place for over a century. Some say it's just decorative, others know better. No better how, I asked, immediately regretting the question. I was supposed to be invisible, unremarkable. The old man smiled, revealing teeth too white and too perfect for his age. You'll see tonight, Mr. Grey. The cremation of care waits for no man, not even consultants. He walked away before I could respond, leaving me staring at the owl statue and wondering how much my cover had already been blown. That evening, as twilight settled over the grove, the atmosphere changed completely. The casual bonhomie of the day disappeared, replaced by something far more serious and ritualistic. Men emerged from their cabins wearing dark robes with hoods that obscured their faces. Some carried torches, others strange ceremonial objects I couldn't identify. I found a dark robe hanging in my assigned cabin, along with a note. Attendance is mandatory. Silence is sacred. The owl sees all. What I witnessed that night will stay with me forever. As darkness fell, hundreds of robed figures processed through the forest paths, converging on the lake where the great owl statue loomed. Torches flickered between the trees like malevolent fireflies. The only sounds were footsteps on gravel and the whisper of fabric against bark. I followed the crowd, keeping my head down and my hood up. The robe smelled of incense and something else, something organic and unpleasant that I couldn't identify. We gathered in a natural amphitheatre around the lake. The owl statue dominated the scene, its eyes seeming to glow red in the torchlight. A wooden boat had been prepared at the water's edge, and in it lay what appeared to be the effigy of a child, small, wrapped in white cloth, disturbingly lifelike. But as I stared at the bundle, a horrible doubt crept into my mind. The proportions were too perfect, the weight distribution too natural. The way the cloth clung to what lay beneath suggested something more substantial than straw and sawdust. A figure in an elaborate robe stepped onto a platform beside the owl. Even with his face hidden, I recognised the bearing and voice of a man who'd been on television every night for years. A former president whose policies had shaped a generation. Brothers of the Grove, his voice boomed across the water, amplified by hidden speakers. We gather once again beneath the ancient eyes of wisdom to perform the sacred rite that frees us from the burdens of conscience. The crowd responded in unison. We banish care and cast it to the flames. Care, that pale and common thing that binds the hands of power. Care that whispers doubt in the ears of decision. Care that stays the sword of necessary action. We banish care and cast it to the flames. The ritualized call and response continued for nearly an hour. Invocations to ancient deities whose names I recognized from my study of Middle Eastern mythology. Moloch, the Carthaginian god of child sacrifice. Enlil, the Mesopotamian lord of wind and authority. Names that shouldn't have been spoken by American leaders in the 21st century. But the most disturbing element wasn't the pagan imagery, or even the suggestions of child sacrifice. It was the casual way these men, titans of industry, shapers of policy, guardians of democracy, participated in rituals that explicitly celebrated the abandonment of human compassion. The ceremony reached its climax when the boat carrying the effigy was pushed out onto the lake. Flames erupted from the water around it, hidden gas jets, I realised, creating the illusion of supernatural fire. The figure in the boat burned quickly, the white cloth falling away to reveal... I still can't be certain what I saw. In the flickering light, with smoke obscuring my vision and my mind reeling from the horror of it all, it might have been an elaborately constructed mannequin. The realistic movement could have been caused by the flames consuming internal supports. The sounds, brief, high-pitched, quickly cut off, might have been air escaping from burning materials. But the way some of the robed figures wept as the fire consumed its offering, the way others cheered with genuine ecstasy, suggested something far more sinister than theatrical pageantry. As the flames died down, the crowd began to disperse. I started to follow them back toward the cabins, but a hand fell on my shoulder. Mr. Grey. It was the old man from earlier, still wearing his ceremonial robes. You're invited to the inner circle gathering, a rare honour for a consultant. Before I could refuse, two other figures flanked me. Not threatening exactly, but their presence made it clear that declining wasn't an option. They led me deeper into the forest, away from the main paths, to a clearing I hadn't seen during my earlier reconnaissance. Here, perhaps 30 men stood in a circle around a fire pit carved directly into the bedrock. Unlike the theatrical grandeur of the main ceremony, this felt ancient and deadly serious. The inner circle ritual began at midnight. The participants had exchanged their dark robes for masks of polished bone, owl faces with hollow eye sockets that seemed to bore into your soul. They moved with practiced precision, suggesting this ceremony had been performed countless times before. The man who'd led the earlier ritual stepped into the centre of the circle. Without his presidential bearing and familiar voice, he seemed diminished, just another acolyte serving powers older than nations. "Brothers of the Inner Grove," he intoned, "we gather to receive the wisdom of the Ancient Ones, and to consecrate the plans that will shape the world's destiny." The response came in a language I didn't recognise at first, harsh consonants and guttural vowels that seemed to bypass the conscious mind and speak directly to something primal and terrified in the human psyche. But as my Navy intelligence training kicked in, I began to parse familiar elements. This was Akkadian, the ancient language of Mesopotamia, dead for over 2,000 years. They were chanting the names of forgotten gods and promising them sacrifices of nations. Symbols were drawn in the ash around the fire pit, not random occult doodles, but specific sigils I recognised from declassified CIA documents. Project MK Ultra had experimented with ritualistic programming, using ancient symbols and dead languages to bypass conscious resistance in human subjects. The research had supposedly been discontinued in the 1970s. Apparently it had just moved to a more exclusive venue. The ceremony continued for hours. Maps were produced and spread on the ground, not of geographical territories, but of economic zones, resource deposits, population centres. Plans were discussed in mixture of English and Akkadian, but the intent was clear enough. Wars to be started, governments to be toppled, populations to be controlled. And through it all, the participants spoke of themselves not as American leaders serving American interests, but as servants of the Ancient Ones, preparing the world for some greater transformation. "The harvest approaches," one masked figure intoned. "The sleepers must be awakened. The old seals must be broken." "In the name of those who wait in the deep places," the circle responded, "let the work continue." I crouched in the shadows beyond the firelight, recording everything on a digital audio device I'd hidden in my shoe. But as the night wore on, I began to understand that what I was witnessing wasn't just corruption or conspiracy in any conventional sense. These men genuinely believed they were serving inhuman masters. Whether those masters were real or imagined didn't matter. The policies they were planning would affect millions of lives based on the whims of entities that viewed humanity as livestock. The ritual concluded with each participant drinking from a silver chalice and making individual pledges. The liquid looked black in the firelight, and several men convulsed briefly after drinking, their eyes rolling back to show only white. As dawn approached, the circle dissolved. The participants removed their masks, revealed themselves to be exactly who I'd suspected. Former presidents, current senators, military leaders, corporate titans. They shook hands and exchanged quiet words like businessmen concluding a profitable meeting, which in a sense they were. I made it back to my cabin as the first light filtered through the redwood canopy, but I knew I couldn't stay much longer. Whatever protection my forged identity provided was wearing thin. Too many meaningful looks, too many knowing smiles. They were playing with me, letting me see just enough to understand the scope of what I'd stumbled into. But there was one more place I needed to investigate before I could flee. The lodge marked Styx, access by code only, sat apart from the main camp, connected by a service road that didn't appear on any of the maps provided to guests. I'd noticed it during my first day's reconnaissance, but hadn't found an opportunity to investigate. The building itself was unremarkable. Standard wooden construction that matched the other lodges, designed to blend into the forest environment. But the security was anything but standard. Biometric scanners, electromagnetic locks, motion sensors that could detect a heartbeat from 50 feet away. Fortunately, My anonymous benefactor had provided more than just a forged access pass. Hidden in the lining of my suit jacket was a USB device that looked like a standard thumb drive, but contained sophisticated hacking tools developed by someone with serious technical skills. When plugged into the lodge's security system, it created a temporary blind spot in the sensors and provided the access codes needed to bypass the locks. Whoever wanted me to see what lay inside had planned this infiltration down to the smallest detail. The lodge's interior was a facade. Behind a false wall accessed by yet another hidden panel, stairs led down into the bedrock beneath the forest. The passage was older than the buildings above, carved stone rather than modern construction, lit by electric fixtures that had been retrofitted into ancient sconces. At the bottom of the stairs, a heavy oak door opened onto a chamber that took my breath away. The room stretched far beyond what should have been possible given the lodge's footprint above. Stone shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound journals, rolled documents, and artefacts that seemed to span centuries. At the centre of the chamber stood a massive table carved from a single piece of black stone, its surface covered with maps, blueprints, and what appeared to be governmental documents bearing official seals. I started with the journals, selecting one at random from a shelf marked 1923 to 1945. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, but the contents were anything but quaint. The European situation proceeds according to plan. Our associates in Berlin understand their role, though they believe themselves to be serving the fatherland rather than the ancient ones. The sacrifice of the lesser peoples will provide the spiritual energy necessary for the next phase of the great work. Another journal, this one more recent. Operation Mockingbird exceeds all expectations. The media outlets respond to our guidance without question, believing they serve journalistic integrity, while actually perpetuating the narratives required for population control. The sleeping masses accept whatever reality we provide. But it was the documents on the central table that truly shattered my understanding of how the world worked. Blueprints for the USA Patriot Act dated 6 months before September 11, 2001. Battle plans for the invasion of Iraq, complete with fabricated intelligence reports about weapons of mass destruction. Early drafts of social media algorithms designed not to connect people, but to divide them into manageable, controllable factions. And newer documents that made my blood run cold. Plans for a global pandemic response that prioritized control over public health. Blueprints for digital currency systems that would eliminate financial privacy entirely. Population reduction strategies disguised as environmental initiatives. The most disturbing document was a roster of participants going back to the 1870s, when the Bohemian Club was first founded. Names I recognised from history textbooks, titans of the Gilded Age who'd shaped America's industrial development, but also names that shouldn't have been there. Figures from much earlier periods, some dating back centuries. Either the record keeping was fantastically inaccurate, or some of these participants weren't entirely human. At the bottom of the most recent page, a note in fresh handwriting. E. Granger, journalist, witnessed Inner Circle ceremony. July 16th, 2023. Asset or liability. Recommend termination if no compliance by dawn July 18th. They knew exactly who I was, had known from the moment I'd walked through their gates, the anonymous email, the forged pass, the convenient access codes. It had all been an elaborate test, and I was apparently failing. A motion sensor somewhere in the chamber beeped softly. Red lights began flashing along the walls. In the distance I could hear the sound of heavy footsteps descending the stone stairs. I grabbed as many documents as I could carry, stuffed them into my jacket and looked for another way out. But there was only one exit, and it was about to be filled with very unfriendly people. The footsteps were getting closer. Voices echoed down the stairwell, professional, clipped, the kind of tactical communication used by military operators. But then the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in hellish red. And in that brief moment of darkness, I heard something that shouldn't have been possible. A voice speaking directly into my mind, words that bypassed my ears entirely. Run, little journalist. Run and tell the world what you've seen. but know that the telling will be your doom, and the world's salvation requires far greater sacrifices than one man's life. When the emergency light stabilised, a section of the stone wall had opened, revealing a narrow tunnel that led deeper into the earth. I didn't hesitate. Whatever entity had just spoken to me, whether it was one of the ancient ones or something else entirely, it was offering me a chance to escape. I took it. The tunnel system beneath the grove was extensive and clearly ancient. Carved passages connected natural caves, creating a network that probably extended for miles underground. The walls were covered with symbols similar to those I'd seen during the Inner Circle ceremony, but these were older, deeper, worn smooth by centuries of whatever had moved through these spaces. I followed the main passage for what felt like hours, guided by phosphorescent moss that provided just enough light to avoid the worst obstacles. Behind me, I could hear sounds of pursuit, voices, flashlight beams, the occasional echo of radio communication. But the sounds were growing fainter, suggesting that my pursuers either couldn't find the tunnel entrance or were reluctant to follow me into the deep places beneath the forest. Eventually the passage began to slope upward. Fresh air carried the scent of rain and growing things. A natural opening concealed by hanging vines led out into the forest several miles from the main grove compound. I emerged to find the sky filled with storm clouds. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first fat raindrops were beginning to fall. Perfect cover for an escape, if I could make it to my car before the Grove's security forces expanded their search perimeter. But as I made my way through the forest, I realised I wasn't alone. Figures moved between the trees, not the tactical teams I'd expected, but something far stranger. They wore the bone-white owl masks from the Inner Circle ceremony, but their movements were wrong, too fluid, too precise. And their eyes glowed with a faint bioluminescence that had nothing to do with reflected light. "The journalist sees too much," one of them said, the words somehow audible despite the increasing thunder. "The ancient ones are displeased." "But the compact must be honoured," another replied. "He was brought here for a purpose. Let him carry the message to the outer world. Let them know what awaits." I ran. Behind me, inhuman laughter echoed through the forest. Not pursuit exactly, but something far more unsettling. The sound of predators who were confident their prey could never truly escape. I reached my rental car as the storm broke in earnest. Rain pounded the windshield as I drove through the night, taking back roads and avoiding the main highways. In my jacket pocket, the stolen documents felt like they were burning against my chest. But I'd made it out. I had evidence. I had proof of the conspiracy that shaped world events from the shadows of a California forest. Or so I thought. I uploaded everything to an offshore server farm in Iceland. Documents, audio recordings, photographs, detailed notes of everything I'd witnessed. Multiple backup copies, distributed through anonymous networks, protected by military-grade encryption. Within 6 hours, every file had been corrupted or deleted. My apartment was ransacked while I was at an internet cafe, uploading the files. Nothing obviously stolen, but every electronic device had been confiscated or destroyed. My laptop, phone, backup drives, even the digital camera I'd left in a drawer, all gone. The mainstream media ignored my story completely. Alternative news sites that initially showed interest suddenly went silent. Forum posts about the Grove were deleted within minutes of being posted. It was as if the entire internet had been scrubbed of any reference to what I'd discovered. But the worst part was the dreams. Every night since my escape, I've been visited by visions of the Ancient Ones. Vast, tentacled entities that exist in spaces between dimensions, feeding on human suffering and preparing for some cosmic transformation that will remake reality according to their twisted desires. They show me glimpses of the future they're working to create. Cities drowned beneath black oceans, skies filled with screaming winds, populations reduced to cattle serving inhuman masters. And they whisper that I'm not a hero or a journalist or even a victim. I'm a messenger. They wanted someone to witness their ceremony, to understand the scope of their power, to carry word of their inevitable victory to the outside world. Not to warn humanity. Warnings imply the possibility of resistance, but to spread the despair that will make their final conquest easier. Every word I write, every person I tell, Every attempt to expose the truth only serves their greater purpose. The corruption of hope, the murder of faith in human institutions, the slow transformation of free people into willing slaves. I'm writing this final entry from a motel room in Reno. I've been driving for 3 days, never staying in one place for more than a few hours. But I know it doesn't matter. They're not hunting me because they don't need to. I'm already serving their purpose just by existing, just by remembering what I saw in the grove. The cremation of care wasn't just a ritual, it was a recruitment ceremony. And I wasn't an infiltrator, I was an initiate. Tonight, I'll drive east toward the desert. Maybe I'll find some way to break the cycle, to turn their own trap against them. Or maybe I'll just disappear into the wasteland and let the truth die with me. But if you're reading this, if somehow these words have reached you despite all their efforts to control the flow of information, then remember this. They call it the cremation of care, but what they really burn is conscience. And when the fires die down, the world grows a little colder, a little darker, a little more ready for the ancient ones to reclaim what they consider their rightful dominion. The fire in the grove never really goes out. It just spreads, invisible and inexorable, consuming everything human until only the shadows remain. And in those shadows something very old and very hungry is waiting to be born.